Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor. So today, it's a bit of a change of pace. Today, we're going to be talking about a movie and not a book. But the movie we're talking about is Dracula from 1931, because this is the first in my series of Universal Horrors, where I'm going to be talking about all the Universal classic horror movies. Starting with the first major one, Dracula from 1931, and then next time it'll be Frankenstein from 1931. And we'll just go on from there as long as you are willing to listen to me. So, the Universal horror movies, I've always loved them. And I think it's kind of appropriate to talk about them here, even though it's a booktube channel, because the genre of horror, literature and cinema are pretty much, they have influenced each other pretty heavily. It's hard to find horror literature that has not been influenced in one way or another by films. And of course, very often films are based on books, and this is one of those. So it kind of works. The first Universal horror movie was probably The Phantom of the Opera. But the first sound film, first talkie, was Dracula in 1931. And it was an early sound film. It was the first horror movie with sound. And it's a really interesting movie. It's one of those movies I saw a lot when I was a child. All the Universal horror movies, I was a huge fan of them when I was a little kid, because every Saturday they would play a Universal monster movie, usually. It was either that or some of those giant monster movies from the 50s or something like that. But a lot of times it was Universal movies. And so I would just watch these things. They usually played a couple of them on Saturday afternoons, if I'm remembering right. So that's what I was doing on Saturday afternoons when I was a little kid. Watching horror movies from the olden days. Dracula is a really interesting one. It was a huge hit when it came out in 1931. Apparently this movie actually frightened people. It's hard to believe now when you watch it. It does have some creepy moments, but it's difficult to see how it could be outright frightening because we are so used to, well, what we're used to in movies nowadays. Movies were still relatively new back in 1931 as a medium. And the original Dracula film was not based directly on the novel by Bram Stoker. It was based on the stage play by Hamilton Dean and John Balderston. And you can really tell in the film. It's a very stagey film. It feels like a stage play for most of it. Despite that, it has some really kind of creepy moments in it. It's very entertaining. And of course, it has some standout performances in it that make it worth watching all by itself. It was directed by Todd Browning, who was an interesting guy, Todd Browning. He had worked in the circus and in carnivals. That was his background, and then he became an actor, and then he became a director. His background in the carnival and in the circuses proved helpful to him, particularly in the film that he did after Dracula. Dracula was a success, and so he was able to make Freaks, which is another horror movie that if you haven't seen it, you really have to see it. There's nothing quite like Freaks, but his experience was helpful there. He made a lot of movies, Todd Browning, a lot of movies that nobody ever sees, I don't think, anymore. But everybody knows Dracula. Ironically enough, there's some evidence that he wasn't that into making Dracula. Helen Chandler, who plays Mina, has said that he often seemed disconnected on the set of Dracula. And a lot of the scenes in Dracula were directed by Karl Freund, or Freund. Freund? I can't pronounce that name. You know, I can't pronounce anything. But he was the cinematographer, I believe, on that film, on Dracula. And he actually directed some of the scenes with the actors. So he is an uncredited co-director, is how he is considered now. But the greatest thing about the 1931 version of Dracula is some of the performances. The performance of Bela Lugosi, of course, as Dracula. I mean, he was so powerful in that role and so interesting in that role that he became iconic. And when people think of Dracula today, very often they think of Bela Lugosi. Certainly his accent has become Dracula's accent. Bela Lugosi, who is a character actor, had played the character of Dracula in the stage play. I think he's still an underrated actor, Bela Lugosi. Because of Dracula, of course, he became a horror star. But unfortunately, Bela Lugosi was the type of actor who considered himself a working actor, which means he said no to nothing. If people offered him something, he did it, generally. But his performance of Dracula was great. And it needed kind of a performance like Bela Lugosi gave. A very dramatic, bordering on the melodramatic performance as Dracula. Because the film was so stagey. There's no music in this movie, except for like at the very beginning titles. So it's a film that has to rely on their performances, because nothing else is going on in this movie as far as what we're used to in a film. We're used to the music accompanying the drama. There being a certain amount of action in the film, not a lot of action in Dracula, because even the outdoor scenes, the few of them that there are, do feel like a stage play. The stage play that it is based on. But Bela Lugosi makes it work. There's a couple of actors who steal the show, Bela Lugosi being the main one. The story is very different from the novel upon which the stage play was based. There are a lot of changes. There are changes in characters, there's changes in situations. The most prominent change, I think, is the change of switching the characters at the beginning of the film, where Jonathan Harker in the novel travels to Transylvania to see Dracula to talk to him about his property that he bought in England. Because Dracula is going to go to England and just cause all kinds of trouble and maybe create a vampire nation. Who knows what he will do if he gets away with it. But instead of Jonathan Harker going to Transylvania in the beginning, they have Renfield go. And that's when we get another great performance in the performance of Dwight Frye as Renfield. Dwight Frye is fantastic as Renfield. By far the best cinematic Renfield you'll ever see. There have been a couple contenders. Well, at least one. But Dwight Frye is just the best. His Renfield laugh is fantastic. So he goes to Transylvania, Renfield. And he doesn't, unlike in the book, where Jonathan Harker goes and he escapes, Renfield is not that lucky. So Renfield is driven insane by his experience with Count Dracula and becomes a maniac who eventually ends up in Dr. Seward's asylum. And the performance that Dwight Frye gives is just great. It's just great. It's a great performance. It's layered. It's nuanced. He's good as the sane Renfield in the beginning. He's good as the madman. And he gives a sympathetic portrayal too, as well as being a frightening one. Just a great Renfield. He doesn't quite top Bela Lugosi, because who can in Dracula? Bela Lugosi. The lines that Bela Lugosi delivered, the way he delivered them, have become legendary for a reason. And man, this movie needed it. Because like I said, if you didn't have a main character with Lugosi's power, this film probably wouldn't work. It also has a very interesting Van Helsing in this movie, Edward Van Sloan, who made a career after this of playing Van Helsing-like characters. Plays a really interesting Van Helsing. The Van Helsing in the film Dracula is not as over the top as the Van Helsing you'll find in the novel Dracula. The Van Helsing that you find in the novel can be, well, he can be a little over the top. He could be a little bit really melodramatic. And whereas the Van Helsing in the film actually seems like a guy you would listen to. He's a lot more toned down, and he's a lot more serious. And Edward Van Sloan actually gives a pretty good performance as Van Helsing. There's a great scene where Van Helsing and Dracula confront each other, and both these characters, they have each other's number. And Dracula tries to use his power on Van Helsing, and it almost works. He almost gets him. And it's just a great little moment from Edward Van Sloan. That's a great moment in the film. Helen Chandler plays Mina melodramatically. This film also has David Manners as Jonathan Harker, who always cracked me up when I was younger, because he is a pretty funny Jonathan Harker. I say, David Manners lives up to his name. He's an interesting Jonathan Harker. I'll just say that. And I always enjoy David Manners whenever I see him. He pops up in a couple different movies. He was in The Mummy, and he was great in The Mummy. Melodramatic actor, David Manners. Yeah, he's fun, David Manners. I like him, and I kind of have come to respect David Manners as a person, because he seems like the kind of guy who lived the life he wanted to live and did the things that he wanted to do. If you find out a little bit about David Manners, I mean, he did the films, he did stage plays, he wrote a couple novels, he wrote some other books later on in his life. He lived to be a pretty old man. I think he was 98 years old when he finally passed away. Interesting guy. And he gives an entertaining performance. Perhaps not one we can take seriously, as he prances about as Jonathan Harker in this film. But it's entertaining. The actors kind of make this movie. But Todd Browning does do his part as well. There are some creepy shots in this film. The vampires are used in a very interesting way. You can't actually see, in this early film, Dracula actually, sucking anybody's blood or anything like that. So all of that is toned down to the extreme. But Todd Browning manages to make everything creepy. The film has a creepy look. It has a creepy feel. So while some things don't work in this film, overly stagey, some comedy relief that doesn't work at all, an ending which is bizarre, where Dracula just kind of goes to his death, to certain death, it's well worth watching. It would be interesting to go back in time and just see the audience reaction back then. Just to see whether they really were as scared as they apparently were, according to all the stories. Just to see what they were frightened of exactly in this film. Certainly, I can see Bela Lugosi being mesmerizing to a 1931 audience. He certainly became the horror star after this film. And the success of this movie guaranteed the continuation of the series of Universal horror movies, which actually mostly focused on Frankenstein and some assorted monsters. Frankenstein was the monster series that everything kind of revolved around. Bela Lugosi never played Dracula again until all the monsters met Abbott and Costello in their inglorious end. Which is odd that he never played Dracula again, because he certainly showed up as other characters in other Universal horror movies, most popularly as Igor. Igor could be his best performance in The Son of Frankenstein. That was a heck of a performance that he did in that film. But the character of Dracula was taken over by, oddly, Lon Chaney Jr., and also David Carradine. Or was it John Carradine? I can't remember. I think it was John Carradine. Excuse me. I'll find out. But yeah, this, as Bela Lugosi's one and only serious turn of Dracula, is well worth watching. It was hugely influential on the way we see the character of Dracula and vampires in general. It pretty much influenced everything vampire-related that followed. So it's worth watching just for that. Not just in the films, but also in literature as well. Kind of a must-see, this one. So that was my take on Dracula from 1931. Hope you enjoyed it. Go see the movie if you haven't seen it. And I will catch you next time. I don't know when I'm going to do another one of these. Probably in a week or two. Who knows? But I will see you next time in my Universal Horror series with Frankenstein. Another really interesting film. Okay, guys, I'll catch you next time.